Have you ever wanted to start a podcast but don't know how? Look no further than Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free of charge. And yes, actually completely free of charge. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more major podcasting platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership necessary, and more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Once again, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. ANCHOR.FM. Thank you for listening. Now enjoy the video. Greetings, lovers of lore. It's your host for today, Original Orchid. Today we're going to be discussing something a tad bit different than our other episodes, but just as brilliant, if not even more. Today, in honor of Women's History Month, which takes place in March, we're going to be discussing 10 underrated women in history, which if you don't know about them, you totally should, because they are absolutely amazing. So before we get into it, please note that we used many sources to make this video as accurate as possible and educate ourselves in order to make this episode. So those sources will be in the description box down below, and we encourage you all to check them out and learn more about these amazing underrated women. So without further ado, let's get to it. For the first one we have is Sophie Schulz. Her full name is Sophia Magdalena Schulz, and she was a German student, anti-Nazi political activist, and part of the White Rose Nonviolent Resistance Group, which was a peaceful opposition movement against the Nazis led by a group of students from the University of Munich. Maybe pronouncing that university name wrong, by the way. She was convicted of high treason following her distribution of anti-war leaflets at her university with her brother Hans, another member of the White Rose group. She was unfortunately beheaded at age 21 by execution, yet went down very bravely. Her last words were, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine sunny day. And I have to go. But what does my death matter? If through us, thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action." Her brother and her friend Christopher were also executed. But the mark they've made on history will stay with us forever and ever. One of her other notable quotes, and there are many by the way, I highly suggest you check them out, was, "An end in terror is preferable to terror without end," which showed her dedication to this amazing cause and showed that she wasn't scared of death or anything else, but she wanted justice. She wanted freedom for everybody, and she wanted justice during this horrible time of World War II. Unfortunately, I didn't know about her till we made this episode, just like most of the other women on this list. And that's incredibly horrible, because she's risked and done so much for us. She left this world in order to help, because she helped. And we need to honor her. Secondly, we have Marie Anning. Marie Anning was a fossil collector and a paleontologist. She grew up in poverty in a small European town named Lyme Regis. In order to support her family, she assisted her father in collecting fossils from the cliffs, oceans, and riptides near her to collect fossils to sell to tourists, which, by the way, was incredibly dangerous since they were very steep and she could slip and hurt herself, particularly as a child, so I do not recommend it. But yeah, she took over her business the business when her father passed away when she was about 11, and when she was 12, she discovered the first complete Ichthyosaurus skeleton. Later, she also discovered 2 more skeletons of the species, a different species called a paleosaur, which was a species not known to exist prior to her discovery. She also discovered the first, and guys, please bear with me with these pronunciations, Pterosaur skeleton outside of Germany, and several ancient fossilized fish. Plus, she helped to discover that the mysterious stones, known during this time as bezoars, were actually not stones at all. They were dinosaur feces. Now, you're probably wondering, there are a lot of paleontologists out there, but what makes her discovery different compared to all those other ones out there? Why is hers essential, important? Besides the fact that these were amazing discoveries, these actually helped prove the idea of extinction. During this time period in which she'd resided in, most believed it was impossible for species to go extinct. And many had never even heard of dinosaurs, and most didn't believe in dinosaurs if they had heard about them, because they didn't believe in extinction, and dinosaurs were and are extinct beings. Marie was able to prove this wrong through the dinosaur skeleton she discovered, specifically the one she found when she was 12, the Ichthyosaur, which is different than any other animal fossils known to humans, because they proved that extinction was in fact real, because it was different than all these other fossils out there. Now, why don't you know her if she's so brilliant? At this time, she wasn't allowed to publish her ideas because she was a woman. Thus, people took her ideas and used her discoveries in their work, her name being left out and being perceived, and these ideas were perceived to be the published findings of the man who published these. Thus, not many people know about her, because her discoveries weren't credited to herself. They were credited to other people because of her gender. Something horribly, horribly unfair, and something I hope through this video we can change, so that everybody can know that Marie Anning was indeed the discoverer, or explorer, paleontologist, whatever you'd like to call it, of these findings. Moving on to the next incredible woman, we have Dr. Eliza Ann Greer. Now, Dr. Eliza Ann Greer was actually born enslaved, yet she was later freed from her enslavement after the 13th Amendment of the United States was launched in 1865, which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime. She also became the first African American woman licensed as a doctor in the state of Georgia, and unlike the standard 4 years of medical school, she actually took 8 years to complete her medical training. Since she alternated each year of medical school with 1 year of picking cotton to pay off her medical tuition. She later ended up moving to Greenville, South Carolina to specialize in obstetrics and gynecology. And then, after struggling for 8 years to become a physician, she unfortunately died in 1902 at the age of 38 after only 5 years of medical practice. Despite this tragic ending, she serves as a role model to all for what she did. This is one of her most famous quotes. "I went to Philadelphia, studied medicine hard, procured my degree, and have come back to Atlanta, where I have lived all my life, to practice my profession. Some of the best white doctors in the city have welcomed me and say that they will give me an even chance in their profession. This is all I ask." She broke gender barriers in this profession and became the first, not only African American, but the first woman in Georgia to become a doctor, which is absolutely incredible, and why she makes this list for one of the most amazing women in history. Number 4. Elizabeth Peratrovic. Elizabeth was a prominent member of the Tlingit Nation, Tlingit Nation, much better, which is a Native American tribe, and she grew up surrounded by discrimination, seeing signs such as, "No dogs, no natives, we cater to only white trade," which, by the way, actions like this were quite common during this era. And later into her life, after viewing a "No natives allowed" sign near her hometown with her husband, she wrote to Governor Ernest H. Gruing, "The proprietor of Douglas Inn does not seem to realize that our native boys are just as willing as the white boys to lay down their lives to protect the freedom that he enjoys." The sign, as they said, was an outrage. During the start of Elizabeth's campaign, she tried to get an anti-discrimination bill passed, but in 1943, this attempt failed when the vote for this bill became a tie. However, she refused to give up. She persevered and traveled across the state, accompanied by her husband, to gain the favor/support from other Native Americans for this worthy cause. And as Richard F. Waingrove wrote, in 1945, the House, which now included 2 natives, passed a bill, which went to the Senate, where it had enough votes to pass. However, one opponent, Senator Alan Shattuck, asked, "Who are these people barely out of savagery, who want to associate with us whites, with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind us?" During the public comment period, Elizabeth, who generally knitted while attending legislative sessions, put down her needles to speak. "I would not have expected that I, who am barely out of savagery, would have to remind gentlemen with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind them of our Bill of Rights." After she described the restrictions her family faced, the senator asked if she thought the bill would end discrimination. She replied, "Do your laws against larceny and even murder prevent those crimes? No law will eliminate crimes, but at least you as legislators can assert to the world that you recognize the evil of the present situation and speak your intent to help us overcome discrimination." The gallery broke out in loud applause. The bill passed through the Senate, which, according to one account, was forced to a defensive whisper at the close of that Senate hearing by a 5'5" Tlingit woman. As Richard has described here, Elizabeth was the reason for the first anti-discrimination law in the history of the United States of America. She's the reason, just as Native Americans were perceived as equal, rightfully so, thanks to her, other groups were able to do the same, following the path that Elizabeth paved. Moving on to the next incredible woman, Maria Rosa Luna Hansen. During World War II, the Japanese military soldiers forced countless women throughout the many countries the Japanese forces occupied into becoming, quote-unquote, comfort women at military brothels, brothels being buildings where men can visit prostitutes. One of these countries was the Philippines. Most Filipino women, well, women of all origins actually, kept these atrocities a confidentiality, but not Maria. She spoke out about the atrocities she faced and detailed about the experience in her autobiography, Comfort Woman, Slave of Destiny, in which she described her experience about being detained in a hospital in Los Angeles, then being used as a brothel by the Japanese Imperial Army at the time, and how she was raped there every single day. She was the first comfort woman ever to speak out, and by doing so herself, encouraged many more to do the same at just 16 years old. After many of these victims came together, they demanded official recognition from the Japanese government and compensation for the atrocities their military men had caused them, something that is still being done to this day. Guys, she was the first comfort woman ever to speak out at the tender age of 16. That's incredible. And by doing so, she's helped so many other women in similar situations of this atrocity in order to speak out as well. which is why she is someone you need to know about. Moving on to the next person, we have Kalpana Chawla. She was born in July 1st, 1961 in Karnal, India, and she studied at the University of Colorado Boulder. She was the first American astronaut and engineer, and she first flew on Shuttle Columbia in 1997. She was also the primary robotic arm operator, and the first woman of Indian origin to go to space. She died on February 1st, 2003 due to the Columbia disaster, but what she's done in history will forever be known. She's paved the way for so many other women, both of Indian descent and women as in general, to go to space and achieve their dreams. And for that, we should all know her name and be thankful for what she's done. Now let's talk about Neerja Bhanot. She was born in September 1963, and she applied for a flight attendant job at Pan Am, which is at the time the largest international carrier in the United States. She was in the top 80 out of 1,000 applications, and at 22 she became the senior flight purser. She died on September 5th, 1986, during the Pan Am Flight 73 incident. This was a group of terrorists attack when the airplane was hijacked, and they were aiming for Americans. She saved 43 Americans by hiding all their passports throughout the airplane, and she died protecting 3 children from gunshots. She shielded them. Because of this, India gave her the Ashoka Chakra Award, which is India's highest gallantry award. Guys, I feel like I've enunciated on so many of these because all of these women have done amazing things. And Neerja is no less. She saved 43 people. She could have just ran. They weren't targeting her. They were targeting the Americans on flight. But she didn't. She chose to save them. And she shielded those 3 children by her own choice. She saved so many innocent lives that day, and she didn't know any of them, but she still chose to do it. And she lost her life fighting and helping the innocent. That is why you need to know Neerja's name. Next, we have Wang Feng. She was born in 1768 in the Qing dynasty. She was born to a family of scholars, so she was taught astronomy and math at a young age. When she first witnessed poverty, it inspired her to write poems, decrying injustice. She wrote many long papers explaining trigonometry and had her arguments about gravity. She also helped to make eclipses more understood. During this time, they weren't really understood, but she had many theories about how they worked, as she explained in her paper, The Dispute of the Precession of the Equinoxes. Thus, being one of the first women in this field to help make such a wonderful scientific discovery, particularly in this field of science. She died in 1797 at age 29, but is considered one of the greatest minds of this dynasty. And as such a great mind, we should all know her name. Next, Valentina Tereshkova. She was born on March 6, 1937, and her family was very, very poor. So she worked in a tire factory when she was very young. She flew solo on the Vostok 5th and set a record of orbiting the Earth 48 times. She was the first woman in space and continues to help these astronauts, making more scientific discoveries every single day. Paving the way, see, here's where way comes in, paving the way for more incredible people to have a chance in space. And last, but definitely not least, we have Freddie Oversteegen. Freddie Oversteegen was born on September 6, 1925, and she joined the Dutch resistance during World War II when she was only 14 years old. Her mother took in Jewish refugees. These during 1939, when Europe was on the brink of the war. And she and her older sister, Truss, seduced Nazi soldiers into the woods, where the sisters would then take out their guns and shoot them. They would tell these soldiers they would meet them in the forest for a kiss, but instead, they get a bullet to the head. She would also ride on her bike and pass out anti-Nazi pamphlets. And she wore braids that would make her younger than she really was. She died on September 5th, 2018, at the age of 92. But just as these other women, she contributed to history so much and helped so many innocents from the Nazis. Plus, made a huge difference in passing out those anti-Nazi pamphlets. Thank you for listening to this episode, and thank you for learning about these wonderful, wonderful women who, of course, need more recognition in this world. A reminder, here you go, that we've only named 10 of these incredible women, and welcome listeners to add more in the comments, or, depending on your platform, messaging us, so we can all learn more about these amazing, amazing women and celebrate them. Something we should always do, regardless if it's Women's History Month or not. And for those of you who have stuck with us till the very end, here's an extra for you all from a butter... I'm sorry guys, I'm mispronouncing so many things today. From a butter enthusiast in me and in both mine and Vicious Venus's lives, Norma Leone. She was a farmer and artist, also known as the Butter Cow Lady, who created elaborate sculptures and pieces of art out of butter. Can you guess her most famous creation? You guessed it, the butter cow. She unfortunately passed away in June 26, 2011, but her contribution to art will live forever. Thank you once again for listening and taking the time to know these wonderful, wonderful women. And here is where I'll be signing off. Thank you. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing or following us for the next episode of the Whimsical Whispers Podcast, home to stories of all kinds. Thank you, and have an amazing, incredible day.